Welcome to Central Division Hockey, the podcast. I'm Tim Bigelow. For the first time, you may be viewing this in video form on the podcast's new YouTube channel, or, as I've always done prior, you may be just listening to the audio podcast. Allow me to reintroduce myself and the Central Division Hockey, the podcast concept between local media and fan base individual team market NHL coverage and the largely Eastern biased national NHL coverage. You go from your favorite home team, in-depth local homerism bias to a national one that for most Western Division teams doesn't pay enough attention to your home team to provide more than a surface level analysis. Somewhere in between the two, I came up with a division-only loop of NHL coverage. For me, the additional teams would ideally balance the homerism and improve objectivity for the group, and the interest for the fan base was the other teams were in fact the most important rivals come playoff time, or essentially key rivals in your favorite team making the playoffs in the first place each year. The first pandemic pause in the 2019-20 NHL season to where this podcast show has evolved to as 2022 approaches has been a lot of trial and error. Bounce ideas off the wall, media corporation free, sponsorship free, the podcast form officially not PG, although to be fair, I can't remember the last time the content wasn't. Understanding the freedom in place to use unfiltered language doesn't mean you actually have to overkill it or use it at all. These podcast videos hopefully improve from looking like old bad SportsCenter footage, although I don't mind that. But honestly, the content is always and will be about the hockey opinions, and I never planned a podcast to be video or live stream driven. Now, I would hope hockey fans are familiar with Steve Dangle, who now, in connection with Sportsnet, does a YouTube live feed while the Leafs play. Actually, with the game feed included, having secured those rights held by Sportsnet to do so. Point is, to describe what that top level of NHL live streaming would be, that's the NHL benchmark. Now, I am aware of his live streaming and of him having to watch HockeyNet in Canada or Sportsnet game Leaf feeds when they play a Central Division team being the only time I would. I don't care to watch the Leafs, and it's not in the hopes of Toronto winning or being disappointed when they don't. It's also why I haven't watched Dangle in live stream action. I don't care about Toronto sports teams. I've spent more time on YouTube watching Dangle's trade tree videos than his live streams. Some of those are pretty good if I have an interest in the trade being discussed. I don't want to watch the Maple Leafs, and I do hope Toronto lose when I watch a Central Division team play them. Every time. An all-Eastern Conference Boston versus Toronto game, I don't care to watch at all. Both teams can't lose, so it's a disappointment that one does. With this video, the Central Division Hockey, the podcast YouTube channel is up. This is the introduction to the YouTube channel vid, and it's also a audio podcast. The listeners of the podcast, I hope, will subscribe to the YouTube channel, and hockey fans of the Chicago Blackhawks, Colorado Avalanche, Dallas Stars, Minnesota Wild, Nashville Predators, St. Louis Blues, Winnipeg Jets, and the most recent edition, Arizona Coyotes, especially subscribe because those are the teams the NHL Central Division podcast covers. I have to make use of multi-devices, in fact, to start live streaming on YouTube in order to do this, and YouTube does have subscriber minimums in place to do so on specific devices. That's a requirement I need to be able to do this going forward. Getting free subscribers to the YouTube page does allow the possibility for more live stream options. So I'm asking you to subscribe. Now, legally, the live streams won't show the NHL games on the screen like Steve Dangle's do at present because the right holders of the 8 teams haven't agreed to do it. And starting out, well, it might never be big enough for the rights holders ever to agree to. Essentially, as selected games are live, I will be streaming my commentary of division games on YouTube while you, like me, watch the games on your TV, and the YouTube feed is on a second device. It will pick up some of the play-by-play from the feed in the background and my commentary, agreement or disagreement as the game goes along. a chat moderator is also going to be a valuable asset. It might be for nationally televised games that lack the local play-by-play especially, and it won't be for every Central Division game. Division head-to-head games will be ideal games or other key matchups. I haven't decided if all the podcasts will be video and audio going forward, as this one is, or only selected ones, and the live streams, of course, will be on YouTube only once we begin doing them. How many are done is really going to be based on the interest of viewership when doing it. Don't know till we try to do it how the response will be. After the NHL Christmas break, an unplanned extended one that I'm sure you are all aware of, the NHL game postponements prior to it, and more after. So December 28th, when the NHL returned to play over the last 3 days, 4 games involving Central Division teams have been played by 3 Central Division teams. That's less than half the division teams playing a game, and that means a lot of teams are exactly where we left the last audio podcast. Therefore, the 3 teams that have played games in the division, St. Louis, Nashville, and Arizona, are the ones focused on more so in this edition, having actually played games. I asked out loud why the NHL didn't keep the taxi squads for this year at the beginning of the season, and the NHL returned from the Xmas break, and the taxi squads have returned. The squads can be up to 6 players that can travel and practice with the team up to the final game for each team prior to the NHL's All-Star break this year. No player can spend more than 20 cumulative days on the taxi squad during the temporary formation period. The NHL also, on emergency player call-ups, up the cap limit to players to 1 million AAV or less. That, for salary cap purposes, aids in performance bonus limitations. If you remember, St. Louis couldn't call up rookie defenseman Scott Pernovich earlier in the year and stay under the cap at that time. They would have, at that time, if this cap adjustment was in place, been able to do that. Now, postponements and thresholds for teams to be paused has been case by case, team by team. The shutdown of attendance in Canadian markets has added cancellations out of the break as well. Essentially, more postponements, and really to date, Canadian teams playing their U.S. road schedule games, the home dates postponed, even all Canadian matchups included in this. The NHL has also followed the CDC guidelines and officially shortened isolation periods to 5, not 10 days with a negative test. Reports by Daily Faceoff's hockey insider Frank Saravelli, the key important wording that again may in fact affect the NHL Canadian teams more so than US-based ones is if allowed by local authorities. And if you're a fan like me, I'd rather be talking about the games being played, the game within the game. This is an NHL hockey sports podcast. In fact, even in discussing upcoming games for the teams, I'm better to say potential next scheduled game until the actual puck drop. At the NHL Xmas break, I had put the Central Division teams into 3 tiers. The first upper tier is Minnesota, Colorado, and St. Louis, the team's best position, I feel, to finish in the top 3 division playoff spots this year. St. Louis and Minnesota are slated to play this year's Winter Classic outdoor game in Minnesota on January 1st, probably today when you're listening to this, a marquee NHL showcase game. St. Louis is the only of the 2 teams to play a game after Christmas, but prior to the Winter Classic. St. Louis at home doubled up Edmonton 4-2, and with the win out of the break, moved a point ahead of Minnesota for first in the Central Division. The outdoor Winter Classic game at Target Field is therefore, at least with the Central Division standings using points, a first-place division showdown game between the teams. St. Louis's win over Edmonton was driven by a 2-goal, 1-assist night from Vladimir Tarasenko, who was without his Russian line mates Pavel Buchnevich, non-COVID illness, and Ivan Barbashev on the COVID list. Tarasenko's line mates versus Edmonton had him put with returning St. Louis players Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou as a line. Both had a goal, and Kyrou a pair of assists additionally in the game. St. Louis saw the return of top 6 forward David Perron as well. St. Louis' consistent play with what key players are in and out of the lineup has been one of the better storylines of the division teams. St. Louis, 32 games played, 18-9-5 record, 41 points, first in the Central, 641 point percentage, streak, 1 win, goal differential plus 23. St. Louis is still without center Braden Shen on injured reserve, as the remaining notable top 6 forward that won't be available for the Winter Classic. As well, forwards James Neal and Dakota Joshua are on IR. Backup goalie Ville Husso and defenseman Robert Bertuzzo out with COVID. Barbashev and Bushnevich look to return, as well as bottom 6 forward Oscar Sundqvist. Keep in mind, I'm not giving the actual game day lineup. It's a projection of available players a day prior, and mostly sharing because it's the Winter Classic game. Minnesota's list of notable players out include captain defenseman Jared Spurgeon and center Joel Eriksson will miss the Winter Classic. Forward Jordan Greenway is listed as day-to-day, and defenseman Jonas Brodin entered COVID protocol that under the 5-day rules could return for eligibility to play. Keep in mind, more players can end up not being able to play, and Minnesota brought up top prospect defenseman Kalen Addison onto the taxi squad, additionally making him an available game day option. Minnesota, 30 games played, 19-9-2 record, 40 points, second in the Central, 667 point percentage, streak, 1 loss, goal differential plus 20. Minnesota is a point behind, but has 2 games in hand on St. Louis, and the head-to-head matchup will keep that at 2 games, while providing the opportunity with a win to move back into sole possession of first in the Central Division. And while I would normally look at the home and road records that would favor Minnesota at home and not St. Louis on the road, both teams are undefeated in outdoor games this year. Minnesota's home record is not for games played at Target Field. Home field advantage in the outdoor game isn't the same as the friendly confines of the home rink familiarity. The outdoor game is expected to be the coldest conditions for the NHL to play one under, -4 Fahrenheit, but -18 Fahrenheit at night, and it's a 6 p.m. Central Standard start. -5 Fahrenheit anticipated for puck drop. That for those outside of the U.S. that all use the metric system, that's -20 degrees Celsius, but near -28 degrees Celsius Saturday night. Minnesota GM Bill Guerin announced Thursday head coach Dean Evason and the team's entire coaching staff were signed to multi-year contract extensions, including assistant coaches Darby Hendrickson, Brett McLean, and Bob Woods, goaltending coach Frederick Chabot, and video coaches JT Gindra and Jonas Plum. St. Louis and Minnesota made an American Hockey League level trade, forward organizational depth exchange, as Minnesota sent forward Will Bitton, 23, to St. Louis for forward Nolan Stevens, 25. At the time of the trade, Bitton had 8 points in 20 games played in Iowa, American Hockey League, and Stevens had 12 points in 20 games played in Springfield at the American Hockey League. With the Central Division game scheduled for New Year's Eve postponed, the Winter Classic is the next division game day, but it is the latter of 2 division head-to-head games at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Chicago is scheduled to play in Nashville at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time for an all-division game Saturday as well. Colorado, 27 games played, 17-8-2, 36 points, fourth in the Central, 667 point percentage, streak, loss 1, goal differential plus 24. Colorado hasn't played since prior to the Christmas break and has 3 games in hand on Minnesota and 5 comparatively to make up on both St. Louis and Nashville. By points percentage, it's Colorado and Minnesota with the division best records equally, and given the 667 point percentage, you expect Colorado to win 2 out of 3 games in hand based off of that. Putting Colorado with St. Louis and Minnesota in that upper tier of the division just makes sense, even though it's projecting on games in hand. As for the 2 days between when Colorado is at present expected to play, we can talk about the lineup they deploy when Colorado do return to play, like providing free advertisement to not gamble on NHL hockey based on lineup uncertainty until I'm paid to tell you to gamble, like everyone else's sponsorship Wise on Hockey Podcast currently does. Second tier Nashville, Winnipeg, and Dallas. The wildcard playoff battleground teams currently. Nashville had back-to-back road set out of the Christmas break. Yep, the schedule rolls on for some teams unadjusted without any postponements rescheduled yet. Nashville fell 5-3 in Washington and lost in a shootout 4-3 the next night in Columbus. Notably, Captain Roman Josi is on the COVID list. Bottom six center Colton Sisson and fourth line center Tommy Novak are as well. All Nashville's other roster players available. The absence of top defenseman team point leader Josi is not replaceable at 24 minutes 46 seconds average time on ice per game. The time on ice team leader, that has to be made up by committee. Thus, if you're watching Bally Sports and Nashville play-by-play guy, Willie Donick, explained versus Washington that Alex Carrier was incorrectly replacing Josi in the lineup. And to be clear, I think Donick is an excellent play-by-play guy all in all. Here's why on this specific point he missed the mark. Carrier plays with Josi opposite him as a D pair. And the increase for Carrier might be on the first power play unit or overall time on ice, but he is part of Nashville's top 4D group with Josi in or out of the lineup. That's the key here. He isn't an inserted replacement defenseman. Likewise, second pair Matthias Ekholm slots up to top pair, and Dante Fabro stays in the second pair role with a new teammate. That second left-hand defense spot is where Nashville needs to slot Josi's lesser replacement in the Nashville top 4 D group and adjust the whole D group's time on ice with their elite captain out. Ben Harper, who you don't want to call Josi's replacement, is who came into the lineup. Now, you can put him with Fabro on the second pair, as Nashville coach John Hines did to start versus Washington, or one of the two regular bottom pair defensemen can move up so Harper plays on the bottom pair instead. Those are the actual options. If you're Nashville, you run your three best defensemen heavy in rotation and spread out the rest of the D time on ice, including your bottom pair playing more. That's really what Nashville does. Carrier's time on ice bumps up, but so does Ekholm's and Fabro's as well. This year, Nashville's best five-spot defenseman is Matt Benning, and he could play top four in a pinch best. But understand, that requires he or one of Carrier or Fabro needing to play their off-handed side, as they are all right-handed defensemen. In theory, Mark Borowiecki, a left-hand D, should move up, but he in actuality plays the least time on ice of any Nashville D, usually in his bottom pairing role, so the increase by the Columbus game was Benning slotting up. Versus Columbus, it's Ekholm at 28 minutes, 41 seconds time on ice. Carrier, 23 minutes, 7 seconds time on ice. Fabro, 18 minutes, 2 seconds time on ice. And Benning, 20 minutes, 47 seconds time on ice. Meanwhile, Borowiecki, 16 minutes, 4 seconds time on ice. 4 seconds to 3 minutes more than his average time on ice per game this year, and Harper at 16 minutes 40 seconds. In actual usage, Benning is playing top four in Josi's absence, and it's all having all the defensemen play more. Just to be clear, Benning's time on ice was just shy of 20 minutes versus Washington, 19 minutes 44 seconds, so it isn't propped up by the overtime versus Columbus. However, Ekholm and Benning, as the primary penalty kill defensemen, did bring up those time on ice totals up. Nashville 9 for 9 on the penalty kill over the last two games, including going 6 for 6 versus Washington. Anyway, point is Carrier isn't replacing Josi. It's a collective D group effort. I talked about Nashville in the second tier of teams in my last podcast for still not winning games against the NHL's best teams that we can include this year's Washington team among. However, Columbus started well. They, after a long break, were a game over 500 going into the Nashville game in their return to play. Nashville's 26-13 shot on goal advantage through two periods had Nashville up by a goal. Nashville's total shot on goal in the second period alone were more than Columbus had through the full first 40 minutes. Disappointing, Nashville spent the better part of the second down a goal to get gifted the tying goal and the game's lone power play goal to have the lead 3-2 after 2. Nashville doesn't hold it and squeaks out a single loser point on the back-to-back games. Point is, even on the back-to-backs, because Columbus was coming off a long layoff, Nashville needed to score more goals, sharper early on, having played, to when the game finally tilted Columbus's way in the last 20 minutes of the game. Maybe tired due to the back-to-backs Nashville was late in the game. Nashville should have built up a lead over the first 40 minutes to get 2 points on a Columbus team Nashville should beat, even in a back-to-back game situation. If not for Columbus goalie Elvis Merzlikins' soft goal against that Nashville's Nick Cousins has no business scoring from a bad angle, the goal line bank off of the tender and in, Nashville doesn't get this game into overtime to get a loser point. And honestly, Nashville needs 2 points in that game. Although lucky getting 1 point, Nashville shouldn't be happy at all with doing that. Nashville, 32 games played, 19-11-2, 40 points, third in the Central, .625 point percentage, streak, overtime loss of 1, goal differential +7. Nashville, as mentioned earlier, is set to host Chicago Saturday, as of now, next. The close proximity of Winnipeg and Dallas to each other is such that Winnipeg is ahead by a point, having played an extra game till this point of the season, yet by using point percentage, Dallas has a better mark to this stage of each team's games played. The common themes don't end there. Both teams have been defensively good, but haven't scored goals at the expected levels to simplify in explaining the team's struggles. Winnipeg, the Central Division's lone Canadian team, looks to only be able to play its upcoming road schedule, and at a 4-5-4 record on the road, the team needs to put together a win streak, and that is going to be more difficult to do. Dallas is great at home as well, but a woeful 4-9-1 on the road, so that's again a key battleground for Dallas to get back into the playoff race. Right now, it's fair to say that Nashville's point percentage at over .600 is where Winnipeg and Dallas need to be to find their respective teams above the playoff cutoff. They have been afforded a bit of originally unscheduled practice time that both teams need to come out and light the goal lamp out of their extended break. Winnipeg, with interim head coach Dave Lowry, 1-1-0, has actually been afforded almost a mini camp practice to make adjustments with his group. Winnipeg, 30 games played, 14-11-5, 33 points, fifth in the Central, .550 point percentage, streak, 1 win, goal differential +3. Winnipeg is set to play next Sunday in Vegas against the Pacific Division leading Knights. Dallas, 29 games played, 15-12-2, 32 points, 6 in the Central, .552 point percentage, streak, win 2, goal differential -3. Dallas, after Sunday's postponement in Arizona, is set to tentatively restart Thursday, January 6th, hosting Florida. And if you get the sense these matchups for return-to-play games against cup-contending teams who will have played games since the Christmas break isn't ideal for Winnipeg and Dallas, you are absolutely correct. Finishing with the third tier, Chicago and Arizona, the expected non-playoff division team group. Chicago, 30 games played, 11-15-4, 26 points, 7th in the Central, 433 point percentage, streak, overtime loss 2, goal differential -25. Chicago, as mentioned, is slated to play Nashville Saturday afternoon. Starting goalie Marc-Andre Fleury is on the COVID list and not sure he makes the cutoff on the 5-day return, or if it is actually a day too early to be able to do that, if it's even allowed for him to do that. Tyler Johnson practiced for the first time after the Christmas break, and most of the roster, with those 2 exceptions, are said to be possible to play, of course, barring additional COVID or injuries prior to puck drop. Again, Nashville at home, having played a pair of games after the break, ought to be the favorites versus Chicago in the Hawks' first game back, especially without goalie Fleury in net. Late additional, backup goalie Kevin Lankinen was added to the COVID list as I checked prior to recording. Potentially then it's goalie Colin Dahlia called up from Rockford, who will backstop Chicago. Last year, Dahlia started 5 games for Chicago, a 1-3-1 record with a 3.59 goals against average. Arizona was the first Central Division team to play out of the Christmas break in a River Hockey Beauty League offensive thrilling game in San Jose. Arizona's 8-7 shootout loss to the Sharks. To date, the NHL's combined highest goal-scoring affair this year. And if you're new to the podcast and haven't been keeping up on Arizona, they averaged the NHL's worst under 2 goals per game. That this 7-goal loser point loss propped up to 2.1 average goals per game. Still, the worst in the NHL. San Jose, with their 8-goal winning output, improved to 22nd in the NHL at 2.75 goals per game. San Jose's improvement was on the defensive side of the game this year versus last year's team, although no one played defense in this first game in finding their offense. Both teams wanted to do that in the game. Now, Arizona, who also never generally has more shots on goal than anyone they play, night in and night out, had a 46-27 shot on goal advantage. Even so, Arizona remained last in the NHL in average shots on goal per game. And that should tell you Arizona goalie Scott Wedgwood's 7 goals against 20 saves was the worst stat line of the 2 goalies in this game. The shootout stats don't count to his game and regular season stats, and that's a good thing as San Jose's first 2 shooters scored to end this entertaining game. And it was like watching the high-scoring, defensively lousy San Jose outfit of a year ago against an Arizona team we just actually have never seen. Arizona without top defenseman Jacob Chychrun. Additionally, however, vet defenseman Shane Gostisbehere, 1 goal, 1 assist. Rookie Janis Moser in his 3rd NHL game gets 2 goals. Dyson Mayo, an assist. And while forwards Lawson Krause, 2 goals, 2 assists, 4-point night, and Phil Kessel's 4 assist night stand out, the activation of Arizona's D to the team's offense is the key, and the D group in a multiplayer involvement is what's most notable because it was a first. Still, Arizona getting 7 goals didn't actually win, and that gave a Pacific Division team trying to stay in the wild card playoff hunt the full 2 points, essentially helping no one but San Jose in the Western Conference. About all we can give Arizona is a participation medal here for losing again in a more watchable way. Arizona 30 games played, 6-21-3 record, 15 points, 8th in the Central, streak, overtime loss 1, goal differential -54. Sunday's game at home to Dallas is canceled, but not because of Arizona's ability to play. That then has Tuesday at home to Winnipeg and Thursday at home to Chicago as Arizona's next possible games to be played next week. If Arizona plays Winnipeg, it will be exactly 7 days after the shootout loss in San Jose took place. Arizona's on an extended New Year's Eve break after the Xmas break 1 game right now. All kidding aside, the NHL is getting games in as the league can, but the number of postponements is also exponentially greater as the days continue on as well, at least while no Central Division team plays on New Year's Eve. As I record this, there are NHL games scheduled to be played even if it isn't your favorite team. And it's less than a day until the Winter Classic, and this is the last podcast for 2021, or the first of the new year, depending on when it's posted. Want to wish you a happy new year, and here's hoping for a better 2022. Thanks for watching and or listening to Central Division Hockey, the podcast.